we are in the Wilson's Victorian extension to the house. This extension was completed in the 1880s by Colonel Alexander Wilson for his family, probably to his way of modernising the house and putting his own stamp on it. So if you follow me through, we'll go through into this other room here. So just come with me. So here we are in the best of the rooms that remain in the Victorian extension. Strangely enough, this is the part of the house that suffered the most damage in the last 50 to 60 years, mainly because it has a flat roof and there's a lot of water ingress, as you can see from round about. However, as I say, this is the best room here. We believe this was probably Mrs. Wilson's day room, and the smaller rooms to the other side that we can't access today for safety reasons were probably their bedrooms, and this was their day sitting room. As you can imagine, we do have a chaise longue in here. Unfortunately, it's not original to the house. However, it perhaps sets a scene as to what the room may have looked like in its heyday. Beautiful south-facing room, double aspect, getting morning sun and all round. So you can just imagine how luxurious this room would have been in the late 1880s when Colonel and Mrs. Wilson and their family lived here. Beautiful views over the lawn and the gardens. It would just have been stunning to be in this room. Now, Colonel Wilson's family made their money from tartan and carpet production in Bannockburn. Now, local people will probably remember the old mill buildings that were down beside the Spittal Bridge, the Taylor's Bridge, down at the bottom of Old Town Green. That was where most of the mill buildings sat, right along from there, along to the new Telford Bridge that was built in the early 1800s by the famous Thomas Telford. Who knew there was so many famous things to look at in this little area of Bannockburn? So much has happened around the area. However, Colonel Wilson, as I said, his family had built their fortune and built lots of houses in the Bannockburn area on the back of the weaving mills. At one point in the 1830s, I think it was roughly, there were over 500 people working in the Wilson's mills in Bannockburn, and that was a combination of men, women, boys and girls. And boys and girls, supposedly from the 1833 Factories Act, should have been at least 10 to work in the mills. Prior to that, they were a lot younger than that. People would have worked a 14-hour day, 6 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock in the evening, 5 days a week, with an early finish at 5 o'clock on a Saturday. And 2 breaks during the day, so it wasn't easy working those days. Very, very hard working, these people. Around after Culloden and such like, with the Prescription Act and tartan, the wearing of Highland dress was banned, apart from for military use. However, the Wilsons were weaving and cottoned on to that and were producing tartan and providing it to the military. So a wee bit of irony there in that there were the Jacobite links to the house some 40, 50 years prior to this. And however, then the Wilsons, who 100 years later bought this house, had links and made their fortune from originally supplying the military with tartan. So there is a bit of irony there. However, by the 1780s, the Wilsons were named in local documents as being manufacturers. So they had started with hand looms and contracting hand loom weavers to work for them, and eventually by that time they obviously had a mill of some description by that time, because it is noted that they had paid for the construction of homes and houses for their workers, and that was way back in the 1780s. Those buildings, people locally would have known now as the Hoch area of Bannockburn, which was down alongside the burn, so the people were living just a few minutes walk from their workplace by the banks of the burn. However, by the late 18s, these houses would have been very, very damp, and I believe they were probably demolished in the 1920s or 1930s roughly. I'm sure someone else can confirm around that time. However, they were early days building houses to house their workers coming into work there. Originally it was only the material serge, tweeds type materials with the tartans that they were manufacturing. However, the Wilsons were the ones that were instrumental in the naming of tartans. Prior to Culloden, there's not a lot of evidence of clan tartans or particular families owning a particular tartan. When they started to manufacture in the 1760s onwards, that was when they started, people were asking for particular colours and patterns, and that was where the naming of tartan sets, which is the name for the pattern, the official name for a tartan pattern, started to be not named, they were numbered. But as it became more prolific and more came onto their books, different styles, then they started to name them. However, a lot of the names did not carry down the years. And what we now know as clan tartans started off eventually with their pattern book of 1819, putting all the sets together with the thread counts for the tartans. From there onwards, and then George IV's visit to Scotland in 1822, the interest in tartan blossomed even further, and by the mid 1800s, that is when Alexander Wilson would have taken over the running of the business and expanded in the 1860s. So much so that then obviously he was wealthy enough at that point, after living in this house as a tenant, he bought the house from the Ramsay Gibson Maitland family in the 1883, and then put on this fantastic extension at that point for his family. He did have a large family, therefore he needed a wee bit of an extension to the house. As we all do nowadays, you put a new kitchen in, you do things like that, you do houses up. That was his version on a much grander scale at that time. The Wilson, as I say, the Wilson family lived here until the late 1900s, when Colonel Wilson passed away. At that time, unfortunately, it was discovered that the family business was no longer viable, and to all intents and purposes, the carpet side of it continued because the firm had split to do carpet making, and that was what the Royal George Mill was built for, that sits beside the Telford Bridge. That is the one remaining mill that belonged to the Wilsons and is approaching 200 years old. It's now owned by the local Masonic Lodge and used as a Masonic Hall and a keep fit studio, but at least it's still there, so please have a look at it next time you're passing through Bannockburn over the famous Telford Bridge. Thank you.
Gaudete, gaudete, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine. Gaudete, 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 Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine. Gaudete. Tempus aris gratiae hoc adoptabamus, caminale titiae devotere damus. Gaudete, gaudete, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine. Gaudete, 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 Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine. Gaudete. Deus homo factus est natura merante, mundus renovatus est a Christo renante. Gaudete, gaudete, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine. Gaudete, 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 Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine. Gaudete. Ego nostro consio salet lem in lustro, benedicta Domino salus Rege nostro. Gaudete, gaudete, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine. Gaudete, 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 Christus es natus, ex Maria